Welcome to the Integrity in Journalism panel. We are so happy to have you here at LA BookFest. I am KJ Matthews, journalist, Emmy Award winning. I used to work at CNN. I've worked for the BBC, and I'm happy that I will be your co-moderator for this session. Joining me is Deborah Zara Kobylt. Deborah?
Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you, KJ. Thanks so much. I, too, am a reporter from CNN. And also Fox 11 News in Los Angeles, KCAL 9 News. And we're joined actually by quite a distinguished panel of journalists, Claudia Puig, John Kobylt, and my good friend Dan Lothian, who was the White House correspondent who covered Obama with CNN some years back. And I thought it would be interesting to start with Dan to talk about what must it be like currently in the White House administration, when you're in the press room, covering every day what's going on there with Donald Trump, with Dr. Fauci, and everyone there. What do you think that must be like?
I can only imagine. I mean, I always used to tell people when they would ask me what it was like to be sitting in that room that it was the most difficult job that I had ever done. It was like cramming for a final exam every single day because you had to process so much information. That's in a typical situation. In what I've heard from some of my former colleagues is that this is something unlike anything that they've ever experienced because it's so fluid. Messages get very mixed within this administration. And so you might have one narrative in the morning and a few hours later, there's a different narrative. And then there's a lot of infighting in between the various different officials within the administration. And all of that is playing out publicly. And so I think it's a confusing time. And then you add the whole other layer that the reporters are under fire much of the time for everything they're saying. So it's a very, very difficult job.
Yeah, I would imagine. I'd like to turn the conversation to Claudia Puig, who joins us, who's a very accomplished and esteemed entertainment journalist who's been covering Hollywood here during this lockdown and this COVID-19 situation, pandemic that we're dealing with. Claudia brings on a different perspective. But Claudia, I'd like you to introduce yourself and talk about how you have handled it here in Hollywood.
Yes, I'm Claudia Puig. I'm president of the LA Film Critics Association, and I'm a 30-year journalism veteran. I worked at the LA Times for 11 years and then at USA Today for 18 years. I currently am on NPR, KPCC, doing Film Week. And yes, it's, every day we hear reports of like, okay, the theaters are going to open back up again and production might start up again. And we hear Chris Nolan is determined to, have his big blockbuster movie open in July, and then we hear Telluride is going to happen in August, and honestly, nobody really knows what's going to happen. All of this is up for grabs. Film festivals have been canceled. Big tentpole movies, are not opening when they're supposed to. A lot of them don't want to open via streaming. They still want to go back to the theater. So it's a giant question mark. I know in other parts of the world, productions have resumed, and so everybody's watching that very closely. In places like Australia, China, there are shows that are being done, Germany. But everything is still, somewhat on hold. People are still working from home, even though things are starting to kind of open up in California. So in 2 weeks, things could be very different. But for right now, we're still in the waiting mode.
Wow. It's interesting because Claudia, this is Deborah, because there's so much that's being reported. Some businesses are opening on a part-time level. Others are able to open up more than that. Parks are open here in California. Beaches may not be open here in California. It's very difficult. John of the John and Ken show on KFI Radio, you talk about this every day, and you have people who call in who are some who very much agree with the way things are being handled politically and in terms of from a health perspective, and some who vehemently are against it. They're saying, look, I got to get back to work. I'll social distance, but please let me get my job back. What do you say about that?
As time has gone on, it's much more people want to get back to work. They're panicking because their businesses are going under and they don't have paychecks. And the federal government has been terrible at running that PPP system. A lot of people got denied the first time and are still in process the second time. It's very difficult. The unemployment phone lines have been jammed. The unemployment website has crashed. There was a website for independent contractors and gig workers that wasn't around for 6 weeks, and then it crashed. It is a mess in terms of people thought they were going to get reimbursed, at least for a couple of months. And that's been not the case. It's been too difficult to get the money for many people. So they're panicking. They want to go back to work. I think they care less and less about the dangers of the virus.
Yeah. What's interesting, I'm finding that a lot of journalists, and we all are friends.
I don't know if that's true. They care less and less. I just wonder if they feel like they can live with it, and social distance where they must and protect those who are most vulnerable, don't you think?
Yeah, but they're willing to take.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you with what you're saying, Deborah. I think that what John mentions is definitely a primary issue, not just here in California, but really all over the nation. I think another issue is just getting accurate information during this time, not knowing what is happening every single day because things are changing. And I'm finding that a lot of journalists are not only having to report the news, but also inform people between fact and fiction. I'm wondering, in all of our own lives, have you had to kind of pull people aside or educate people as to where they can go to get accurate information that's already been vetted, which has not really been a problem before this COVID-19 situation happened, at least not to the degree that we're seeing it now. I don't know, Dan, if you found that to be the case, or Claudia?
I have. And some of that, I also do a weekly show where I'm on a panel, PBS, called Beat the Press. And we talk about a lot of issues like this, like how are people responding to what the media, the information the media is putting out there. And I think you're right, you touched on something that's very important, is that it used to be that 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 sources put out information and people weighed that information and, they either believed it or didn't. Now people are taking pieces of information, they're repackaging it, they're taking headlines, they are self-diagnosing, they're becoming medical experts. They're putting it out there on social media. There is one person on my feed who I went to high school with who sends things on almost a daily basis. It's shocking, the information that's being put out there. It's all twisted. It's dangerous. And it's not something we faced before, at least with the medical component when it comes to social media. There's been a lot of misinformation on social media, but this one is especially difficult because it's dangerous. And people buy into the information that's showing up in their inboxes or on their Facebook walls or whatever social media they're using. They just buy into it. And I think that's a dangerous thing.
It seems like the pattern for that is being set from the very, very top. I mean, you
that's
hear
exactly
about
what I was going to say.
The president is
right.
talking about
Absolutely.
bleach, and drinking and all that. And so there is this whole kind of national sense of like people just, maybe this was created in a lab in Wuhan. I mean, it's when you have the very top people, you have Dr. Fauci, but he's being, somewhat
marginalized,
muzzled. Yes. Okay. Marginalized is better than muzzled. But so when you have the president saying things like that, well, of course you're going to have all these other things. So, I always wonder what this would have been like under President Obama or under any other previous president. I think we would have. Well, I'm not going to get political, but anyway.
Deborah, I was wanting to toss to you to ask you too. Do you think all of this is confounded by the fact that it's an election year? We're dealing with a global pandemic. And remember, in a matter of months, we're going to the polls to elect either a new president or re-elect our current president. So there's so much going on. I'm wondering if that has colored how we see the news and how we're covering it now.
KJ, this being an election year, I've never seen such a mess in my life. I mean, you've got the president who, in my opinion, from the beginning, has just never created any sort of calm. It was very confusing, and everything he said changed from day to day. Then you had a media who was, I call it the gotcha media. No matter what happened every day, most of the questions were sort of to get to know that he was going to react in a way that was comical. So the whole situation never really presented itself with information. Instead, people were just, it was more of a gotcha media, which is what I called it. So are we going to vote for that? Or are we going to vote for the other side? We haven't even heard from Biden. You know, a lot of people are questioning if he's really capable of running for president and being our next president. So, gosh, is this what we're faced with? So, in my opinion, I'm going to go back to Dan for a moment, and then, John, we'll get back to you in a sec, because you've got a lot to say, because you hear from listeners. But Dan, you're someone who sat in those chairs, who would question a president, not this president, but a president. Have you ever seen reporters like this before, where they spent much of their time trying to make headlines for themselves as opposed to getting to the information?
Well, look, I still think reporters are getting to the information. I will say what is different is that reporters are reacting to the way they're being treated. So we've also never seen a president either use social media or, respond to reporters in the way that he has. I'm not saying it's right, but I do believe that a lot of reporters, maybe not, sort of news organizations completely, but reporters are using different tactics, much more edgy tactics than others have used in the past. And I think they're simply responding to the way they've been treated. I will say, though, I don't know. Yeah, there are elements of an election, cycle that plays out in this particular case. But I don't know that it would have been any different, election year or not. This is the current climate that we're in. And this would have played out just like this with an election or not.
John, you talk to people who are frustrated all day. Where do you see this going? Let's talk a little bit in California. You have a mayor who seems to have even stricter guidelines than a governor who said, I believe yesterday, Governor Newsom, that he won't loosen much more up until we have 14 days of 0 deaths from the COVID virus, if I heard that correctly. People are scared. They're nervous. They don't know what to do. Then they're worried about what's going to happen next year.
They're going to stop listening to him because they have to pay their bills. I really don't think the media as a whole has concentrated on the average person's life. They spend a lot of time on Trump and the media's relationship to Trump, all the things we've just been talking about. But in my opinion, none of what we've been talking about so far resonates with a lot of people at home. They're very bottom. If you have a spouse and 2 kids and a mortgage and a business, all you're looking at is your bank account. And there have been studies that say 40% of the people can last a month without income. And that's all they want. They want to know how they can get through this without getting terribly sick and dying, and also how they're going to pay all their bills, because they're not going to get a break from the landlord or the banks or the insurance companies. They're not getting a break from anyone. They're not going to get a break from the grocery stores. And I think there's been much, much less of coverage on people's fears. And there hasn't been much coverage on putting the disease into perspective. The average age is 80 in LA of death. LA County, 51% are dying in nursing homes. It is not a disease that is killing everybody at all ages in a random way. It's really picking out specific kinds of victims, the sick and the elderly. That's not being emphasized enough. There's too much, in my opinion, fear-mongering in general.
It's interesting you should say that, because so many of the articles I read, and maybe this is my self-selection, but will be like about young people getting it and having a stroke, or how that it does affect young people. And maybe those are the anomalies, because we tend to think of it as something that is affecting either infirm or people with underlying conditions. But when I think about sort of the entirety of what I read, because I don't watch much TV news, but I do read a lot of it. A lot of it is, oh, look, there's new symptoms, and oh, look, it's affecting younger people. So it does feel, I don't know if that's necessarily fear mongering, but I think it's people looking for a new angle. And maybe by looking for those new angles, it creates, maybe more confusion for people. I don't know.
Well, I was going to step in and say, I think a lot of it is that when we have people who have died of COVID-19 that are not elderly, that don't have any pre-existing conditions, there's no reason. There's no rhyme or reason for it. And so when there's not an explanation, the problem is people then guesstimate as to why that may have happened. And that's never a good thing. But until we can kind of get even a better handle on why people who are younger without pre-existing conditions are getting so sick or are dying because of this disease, even though many are recovering, it's still scary to a lot of people. And I also think you touched on this, John, but the fact that, there's so many people who would not have health insurance when they lose their job. And there's even many more people who don't have paid sick leave. So I think that's an issue for a lot of people, is that they would stay at home to get well, but they don't have paid sick leave, or that they don't have the insurance. All of those issues are tied to the economy. But in our country, at least, I don't know about other countries around the world, being gainfully insured is attached to being gainfully employed. So
you know what? You brought up an interesting point, KJ, earlier, actually, in what you were saying about people and what they're reading. Because I have to tell you, I have so many friends sending me different articles, and I always write back and I say, consider the source of what you're reading. Where is that scientific research coming from? Is it being paid for by a particular company? I actually think there are many agendas out there. Depending upon what you read, is the outcome you're going to get. Right. And then there's a little bit of fear mongering. There's reporting out there where there's just a little bit of clickbait going on. I think there's a lot of self-interest. I always tell people to read everything, watch everything, and then form your own conclusion. But also you both asked about young people getting it. It also could come down to one's immune system, in which case we don't know yet. Right. But then do you close down much of an economy or open up little bits of it? Until we find out, we may not find out for quite a long time. People keep talking about a vaccine. What if the vaccine isn't that effective? What if it's like the flu vaccine where, this year I think it was 15% effective. So what do we do? Do we stop our lives, or do we continue with some sort of self-discipline, if you will? John, any of you?
I spend a lot of time looking at the numbers, and the numbers are kind of the antidote to a lot of the emotions and panic that people feel. And the CDC has a website, and they call it the provisional death count, some more technical way they put it. And if you go there, you will see that up until last week, in the younger demographics, let's say, 15 to 25, the numbers of deaths in this country are in the single digits. Statistically, there's virtually no one dying under the age of 25. There's a former New York Times reporter, Alex Berenson, who put out on his Twitter after he analyzed the numbers. He said, do you know there's more people in the world over the age of 100 that have died of this than people under 30? So unfortunately, I think a lot of newscasts and websites are using anomalies because that's going to get a lot of hits. That's going to get reading that an 88-year-old died in a nursing home. No one's going to read that story.
Well, I don't know. I think any death
you bring
is
up
too much.
A good point.
The problem is, ethically,
it still is a disease that we don't have a vaccine for, and that's always scary when we're going into this future, and we still don't have anything that can really prevent you from getting COVID-19. So when there's not a vaccine, you're going to have a little bit of fear mongering, unfortunately.
Right, but does that mean that we just stay home? That's the question. I'm on both sides here. I don't want people to get injured and die. I don't. I want to really help protect those that have predisposed conditions. I have one myself. I have asthma. To be honest with you, I'm not going to run to go out to eat. I'm going to really keep it together and stay home until we know a little bit. I'm going to limit myself going to the store. So, Dan, again, you've covered this day in and day out, government and people combination. What do you think is the answer? Do people go out and start to open up their lives? Do we listen to some of the reporting out there that says that we could all, it could peak again? What do we do?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on telling people what kind of guidelines they should follow or not follow. I mean, ultimately, there are local laws and regulations and various different things being implemented. And I think you should, if you want to be responsible, then you follow whatever it is in your particular region. What I will say is, I want to say two things just about in general how the media has been approaching this. First of all, this fear-mongering thing. So this isn't anything new, right? We don't cover every airplane that lands safely at an airport every day when airplanes were flying much more frequently than they are now. But when one single airplane goes down, we cover it because it is the thing that people want to know about. It's the negative thing that happens, for better or worse. That's what we do as reporters. You cover the house that caught on fire, not all the houses in the neighborhood that there were no fires, right? So I just wanted to put that out there. That's kind of generally what news does. But the second point I want to make is that there are a lot of positive stories that are happening on a day-to-day basis, and you do hear about them. It may not be on the network newscasts every single night because they only have 20 minutes, but on local news. There are stories about what young children are doing to help lift the spirits of people in nursing homes by going to their windows and drawing pictures, or there are fundraising things that are helping those families that are hurting. And there are profiles of families who are trying to piece together and hold their businesses together. So the problem is that when these kinds of things happen, we remember the fights with the president. We remember those negative tweets. We remember the reporters who went off and, and started yelling or writing something, whatever it may be. Those are the things we remember. But I have to say, now that I'm not a reporter on a daily basis, taking a step back from that, I'm processing a lot more positive stories. And certainly that's where I'm focusing on more too.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point, Dan. I think, obviously we have to cover the things as reporters that are anomalies. You don't cover the things went normally. That's not news. That's business as usual. But I think, Deborah, also you made a really wise point, which is, I think we have to sort of make our own decisions. I think, whether it's the governor or the mayor sort of slowly implementing plans, that makes sense. And I'm not an expert in this, but it makes sense to sort of do this on a gradual basis. But then we as individuals make our own decisions. You have an underlying condition. My husband is older and I'm concerned about that. So I may not run out to go out to all those places. And I think, ultimately it's up to the individual. I think where it gets a little bit dicey is where people aren't wearing masks and, because you're wearing a mask to protect other people more than for yourself. So I do think that, or people aren't distancing, people do have to be thoughtful of one another. And I think for the most part, people are, but, that's a greater issue.
Let me ask you this, Claudia, since you cover a lot of entertainment, how do people get back to work in this town? Because they work in close quarters, they work on sets. I have a son who works on a set and they're not getting together anytime soon. How do you pull that off?
Well, that's a really good point. There's going to be
a lot of people who are out of work.
They're writing up guidelines as we speak. The unions, SAG, Directors Guild, all of them are coming up with. You're not going to. I was reading something yesterday that said you're not going to see kissing scenes for a while, where people are close to one another, or you will see them done, with CG, or
CG is in now.
Yes, there's all kinds of movie magic that can be implemented there, but they're going to be, you're not going to have a craft services table. Those days are gone. You're going to have little, things that are like the old airline meals that we used to get. So there are all kinds of guidelines that they're implementing to keep that sort of distance. And one of the advantages of people in this industry, I mean, the average person has it much worse than anybody in the entertainment industry because for the most part, people in the entertainment industry are paid well. They can work from home. Yes, there's some job loss, but it's not nearly as bad as a lot of other people. So I'm not going to, be playing the violins for people in the entertainment industry, but they are coming up with all kinds of options for things. And then it will ultimately come down to the big stars. Like, does a star want to go far from home to film something? Probably not. Do they want to jeopardize their health? So, all of that is being figured out as we speak.
And I think another thing I want to add into that, you're going to see a lot of Hollywood contracts now have something called global pandemic.
Clauses,
What happens?
absolutely.
Global pandemic causes. You heard it here first. You will see that in a lot of Hollywood contracts, because before now, I don't know anybody that ever had a pandemic clause in any contract in Hollywood. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but would you agree, Claudia?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that people are working on right now. The guilds are working on it. Individual. I was just talking to somebody from Netflix today. They were saying, the new Spike Lee movie is coming. We want to work out some very clever things. We're going to move it up. We're going to do this. There's all kinds of, there's a lot going on in terms of planning how this is all going to work out. And, these are people who are used to coming up with all kinds of inventive and innovative things. So I think there will be some positive to come out of all this. There'll be some invention, and adaptation.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, Hollywood is no different. There are a lot of people at these studios and talent agencies that have also lost their jobs and have been furloughed just like the rest of Americans, So they're dealing with that in addition to dealing with how can we resume work and keep everyone safe.
A lot of my colleagues as film critics, I mean, we're among the first to be axed because, we're not covering the White House in terms of a newspaper, not as important as people covering city government or federal government. So a lot of longtime, very established critics have been furloughed or lost their jobs, and entertainment journalists too. There's a lot of fluff. Freelancers have lost, gigs. So everyone's being affected for sure.
You know what I find interesting? I was on the phone, everybody, with a friend of mine today, and it's all perspective, right? And I was saying to her, and she does fairly well. She's in the entertainment business and happens to live in Malibu. And I was talking to her about how people are really struggling, and she wrote back on text and she said, "How so?" I thought, wow. And I had to explain to her that so many people, regardless of what they do in life, they're the backbone to so many businesses, right? Which is why many businesses will go out, because those frontline workers are going to maybe lose their jobs. And she wrote back to me and she said, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." And I thought, boy, is it all perspective. This is hitting people differently depending upon their economic status, right?
It is. And you know what? If I can jump in here, I think it's not just sort of the general, every business is being impacted, but the news business has been under pressure for so long. And, TV stations, consolidation, you're going to see a lot more pressure on these news organizations to keep going. You're already seeing that with small newspapers and even large newspapers. They've been laying off reporters and other office staff. So small papers, community papers are going belly up. When you have an industry that was running, at least the news industry, that was running on fewer cylinders than when it was brand new, all you need is something like this to really, knock them out. And I think you're going to be hearing more and more of these smaller and even larger TV stations consolidating, shutting down because they just can't make it without the advertising dollars.
Yeah.
Oh, there's no doubt. And John, you work in radio. You know how that is. You're reading commercials all day from your clients. And a lot of those people aren't getting any business. So it's such a trickle-down effect.
Right.
I don't think we're... Go ahead, please.
No, and that's why I think there ought to be a lot of emphasis on reopening the economy as safely as you can, because I know personally some businesses aren't going to last much longer. They're hanging by a thread, and I don't see any reason why we have to wipe out all the businesses and their lives and the employees' lives. I have this feeling that 6 months from now, we're going to wish we didn't go this far with the lockdown. There's a lot of people who are into the lockdown.
It's interesting for you to say that. I think that having the business resume or open again is one thing, but getting customers back through those doors is an entirely different situation. If you were to open up every single business in California tomorrow, let's just say that everybody opened their doors and they said, "We want you to wear a mask and we want you to wear gloves and just be safe." I'm not so sure that you'd even have 50% occupancy. It's one thing to reopen. It's an entirely different thing to make sure that everybody is patronizing these businesses. And that's going to take some time, I think, John. You might agree or disagree.
Yeah, it's funny. Every once in a while, I see a story like in Orange County, somebody opened up their breakfast shop in San Clemente, and the place got slammed. Yeah. I mean, people were lined up out the door. Same thing at a haircut place that opened up. They had a lot. I would
imagine, yeah.
I don't think everyone's going to go, but 50% is better than zero right now. And I think most businesses would take 20, 30% of the business because everybody's out of money. You can't have a society of 300 million people if everybody's out of money. That just doesn't work.
No, that's definitely a great point. I mean, it'll be interesting to see as we continue to cover the fallout as we march into the election as well. So we're kind of having dueling stories going back and forth. And I know it's going to be challenging. It's going to ask you, Dan, how do you think reporters, especially the ones that cover the White House and are covering COVID, how are they going to juggle it all? Because before this whole situation, you had a lot of people on the campaign trail. Now you're pulling people off of the campaign trail and you're having them cover COVID, but you're still having them cover the candidates. So it's a tough situation.
Well, as someone said to me the other day.
Well, it is, but
Go ahead.
It is a tough situation, but I don't think it's not that much of a juggling act because the other candidate isn't doing a whole lot of anything. And I should point out, having covered a lot of elections in my past, I was shocked when, Biden did not do something to just stay in the news on a daily basis. I mean, even before, the allegations against him has sort of become this other story as well. Whatever it is, I would have put together some sort of, different advisors and who would give him updates on a daily basis and put that news out there. You needed to show that, when I become president, this is what I would be doing. He needed to fall into that role. And for the longest time, he disappeared. And when you disappear like that, no one's going to cover that. I mean, a lot of the stories that I saw out there were basically, where's Biden? The stories were pretty much, Trump comes out and basically has unfiltered these events that he was doing every early evening. He would come out and had it to himself. And so I think it's less of a juggling act for reporters. Yeah, we will see Biden sort of step it up at some point, but it will not be as complicated, I think, for reporters because not a lot has been happening.
Will we have a Republican National Convention and a Democratic National Convention, you think?
No, I believe one of them was already canceled, right?
Okay.
And so I'm not really sure how... these are uncharted waters. We've never been in something like this. You hear about, elections being, put off or whatever it may be. These are all, we haven't been down this road. And I think maybe all of these things become virtual the way that we're having this conversation.
Right.
Maybe you'll see more of that because
I think
you can't get rid of everything.
Right.
I just heard that in California today.
Joe Biden very well. Or fairly well. You did then, certainly, because you covered him on a daily basis and you got to know him. Why is he standing back? Why isn't he more in the forefront? I don't get that either. It's like, that's what I said earlier. Joe who?
He's 78 years old.
Yeah, but, so this would have really played to him,
How's he
right?
going to handle being president?
Yeah, I think, look, this is an easy one. I mean, I remember when this all went down, I thought, wow, for someone who might be, at the point where you don't want to be hopping on a campaign plane, every day traveling around the country, do a version of that online. And it's much easier on you, right? And I don't know why. I think part of the reason could be that when this all started, both from the media's perspective, the way it was covered, and the way that society processed it, I don't think that most people thought this was going to last more than 2 weeks, right? Yeah. And so then anything after that was sort of a slow crawl, right? It's like, oh, okay, then it's only going to be 3 weeks. And you saw that with a lot of regions and, we're going to extend it to this and that. So maybe that's what it was. It's like, okay, let's just take a step back. Let the medical issue gets resolved, and then let's jump back into it. The problem is that it went on and on and on. It continues and will continue to go on.
He's got to play some quick catch up.
You know what's interesting? You can really see our government at work here. The federal level, state, and local. Federal has its own set of rules and guidelines. Every state has its own, and then locally we have our own. And I think that's why there's so much confusion. Do we open? Do we not open? Do we do it halfway? Do we do it whole way? I could drive to the next state and get a haircut, but I can't get one here. But then maybe we have the same numbers. Do you see what I mean? So back to, ethics in journalism, how do we sort of set that straight for people so that they feel that they know the right information? Does that make sense? Anybody?
Yeah. John, do you want to try first? Or?
What I think people should be told is perspective. And I think we need to change the mood here and come out of the panic phase. People have told me that they almost literally are hiding under their bed. Based on the antibody tests, and we'll just assume that they're correct, it means well over 90% of the people who test positive don't even have symptoms. And then among those with symptoms, 80% of those have mild symptoms. And then you look at, well, who's actually dying here, and it is the elderly and people with pre-existing conditions, serious ones. The few younger people that are dying are probably dying because of their immune systems go haywire. That seems to be what I've read. So you have to start. You have to start like embracing the numbers. Odds are I'm not going to get this. If I get it, odds are I'm not going to have symptoms. If I get symptoms, odds are they're not going to be serious. And I don't fall into those categories of where I'm really at risk. And I think people can put on their masks and keep their distancing and adjust their behaviors and live with all those facts in their head. You can actually believe that the virus is serious and believe that we have to get back to work, and also believe that we ought to push back a little on the government when it seems like they're getting a little too authoritarian. All three thoughts can be in your head at the same time. And having any one of the three doesn't make you crazy. And I think embracing all three will get us out of this quicker and in a better frame of mental health.
I am really surprised by many reporters who don't question too much of what they're being told to do. They just sort of take it. They're not really giving them hard questions. I mean, KJ, have you noticed that as well?
It's really funny you say that, because I hear both sides. I hear it really depends on the political bit. I've heard people who watch certain networks to say, I'm so glad that they asked the tough questions. I've heard the same people from a different political background watch the same network and say that the questions are kind of gotcha questions. So it really just depends on what you're watching. I actually think there are a lot of hardworking journalists out there who have been pushing people on the facts, who have been pushing to find out more information about the virus, what is available to everybody in their local community, the statewide, the federal-wide. They're working very, very, very hard. And I think that maybe there are a few that have tried to do some gotcha, but I think overwhelmingly, there are a lot of good journalists out there that are working very hard to bring us the latest information and are not slanting it, and are trying to ask very tough questions every day during these White House press briefings to find out as much information as possible, as well as pushing their individual governors and their individual mayors. I think that sometimes, like you said, it's the anomaly, the one journalist that asked a question that may have been out of line that gets the headlines. But I think that that's just a small fraction of the number of hardworking journalists out there that are working to educate us every day.
I'm going to have to
look at hardworking journalists out there, but when you've got a news conference, I'll just use the LA mayor, for example, every day, and it's online, it's virtual, and you can't even ask a follow-up. I think that's pretty tough. And if I were to try, I think I would continue to try and jump in there. But then sometimes, I know this for a fact, because there are certain reporters I know that aren't even getting called on. Their questions aren't even being used because it's virtual and they can handpick who they want to talk to. So while they may be hardworking journalists, personally, I think it's a lot of those tough questions, they don't get to follow up. The big question, why?
Well, that's not really the journalist's fault, though.
What are you using for your numbers? Because numbers change depending upon who gives them to you, right? Depending upon the test. That's how I have felt as I've been watching and reading.
But like what you say, it's being controlled by, whether it's, again, the government, the setup, whether it's Garcetti or whoever is doing it. If it's controlled, then I think that's not really the journalist's fault. I mean, I've seen some really good long form articles. I think of like The Atlantic or Slate or, that's the stuff that I feel like has been really good. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's the format in which, if it's a press conference, they only let you have 3 questions, or they're trying to bring some other people up. I think, again, I don't fault the journalist necessarily for that, because, if you can't ask a follow-up question and you're shut down, what are you going to do?
Right. And we've seen that even happen at the White House, where somebody tried to ask a follow-up question and the microphone was physically taken away from them, physically, on air, live. So sometimes that happens, and you're only, limited to one question. They won't allow you to have a follow-up because there are other journalists in line that want to ask their question.
Or you're accused of asking a nasty question,
Right.
Like some journalists.
Dan, you've covered so much. You've traveled with with President Obama. You even talked to me when you were from China. That was very, very interesting when you were traveling with him. You've seen so much. Have you ever seen coverage quite like this, where it just seems very confusing? What do you think?
No, one of the comparison that I like to make, and this is not an equal comparison, but it's as close as I can come to it, is that when we covered Hurricane Katrina and the devastation that it imparted on the Gulf Coast, that was probably one of the most difficult stories for reporters because they were living it. So yes, we weren't from there. We didn't have our houses destroyed, but we didn't have a hotel that we could stay in at night. It was hard for us to get fuel. I mean, some of the difficult things that people who were living there were going through, we were going through. We were living in tents when we were doing coverage there. So this is that same kind of thing where reporters are now having to find different ways of covering stories. They're anchoring from their homes. They are having to do a lot of work, all of the behind the camera work as well as in front of the camera work as well. And so, and then you wrap it all around the fact that they too could get infected and in fact are being infected, right? So I think this is a monumental story to cover because you don't, as people like to say about national reporters, you parachute into a story, you cover it and you leave. This one, you are part of the story. So it's much more difficult to sort of carry on the way we typically carry on when we cover a story.
Mm-hmm. I wonder where we go from here. Where will we go? Where some states are opening more than others? Will there be pushback? It's so unpredictable. And where we go in terms of science. Where do you like to get your information? I'm going to ask all three of you. How about I start with KJ? Where do you like to get your info?
Oh, I am a digital girl, so I don't watch as much television as I used to when I was actually on TV every day. But I do like to go to the New York Times. I do like to go to Politico. I do like to go to the Washington Post. But I also like to go to Fox News. And I also like to go to Breitbart, if you could believe that. So I really like to rely on more well-researched, investigative, kind of deep dive articles online for my fresh source. And sometimes the radio as well.
Yeah. Claudia?
National Public Radio is a big source for me, not only because I'm affiliated with it, but I also think that they're, relatively unbiased. And New York Times, Washington Post, I get their alerts. I get CNN alerts. In terms of the longer stories, like I mentioned, I Slate and Atlantic, Politico, New Yorker sometimes. And, this is going to sound silly, but in a way, it also helps. I watch Colbert. I watch Trevor Noah. I really like the way they will sort of look at news because sometimes I just need to laugh and I need to keep from crying.
Trevor is brilliant. I love him. I just think he's so brilliant. Yeah. Dan, how about you?
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because actually, the late night folks have been doing a very good job. And I think this is one of those stories where entertainment it can be just as credible, informative as your nightly newscasts, right? They're doing really good interviews. And sometimes the people they're interviewing aren't as on message as they would be with the network newscast. So you can get a lot better
Andrew
information.
Cuomo was on Colbert last night.
So I actually have appreciated that.
I missed that. I've got to see
those have been very candid moments, and those are the kinds of interviews that you want to see in a situation like this. For me personally, National Public Radio, NPR, that's where I get my day in, day out information, and then the rest of it I get digitally. Headlines that come through across social media, I click on it and follow it. I get a lot of newsletters and alerts that come into my inbox. That's pretty much, I would say that probably 80% of what the information I get comes to me that way. And then NPR is the remaining component.
I'm a little like KJ. I get it everywhere. I love to hear and read about opposing opinions to myself, because I need to know how everyone's feeling before that I will determine myself. And sometimes I have no answers either, and I just take it in. But I'm the same way. I do print, I do TV, online, radio, just everything I can absorb. Lately, I've been stepping away a little bit. Especially it's a little tough. We live with it a lot because John talks about it 4 or 5 hours a day. That's a lot, to be talking about COVID all day, and then you bring it home with you. So I'm trying to step away a little bit. So to your point, Claudia, of online, I think that's terrific. John, is John still there, or did he step off for a moment? He's not there, is he?
Yeah.
No. I think we need to take a few little breaks from time to time. I find myself sometimes, because I will delve so deeply, and I think I just need to distance myself a little, just socially distance myself from it just gets to be a bit intense. And then I will, go back, and I keep up on things, but sometimes it just gets to be too much.
This is a perfect weekend for that, right? It's Mother's Day tomorrow. So we've got, people are going to be out celebrating. Hopefully we can all just get our minds off of it. I mean, some of us have moms, some of us are moms, but whatever, we have friends who are moms. So hopefully that's a good reason to step away a little bit. I agree with you. You've got to get out of this a little bit. I'm not sure if KJ is still with us, because I've been having you talk about technical issues, right? People working from home. I had my share today, so I'm not quite sure who's still on there and who's not. But any parting words that you'd like to say? Dan, let's start with you, please. And also talk to us about what you're working on right now. I know you're no longer a White House correspondent, but you do lots of other work.
Yeah. Now, so I'll just start with the latter part of that, where I have a production company where we do a lot of corporate production, storytelling for corporations, nonprofits as well. And we have been in post-production mode. Fortunately, we had been shooting a lot of content in February. And so when all of this hit, we probably had, a dozen or so projects that we could work on during in post-production, which allowed me to still keep my employees going, right? We're getting to the end of that overflow. And so just this week was the first time that we went back out, and it was unusual going back out into the field, the kind of precautions that we had to take. The entire shoot, it was a 2-day shoot, spent the entire time there with my mask on, sweating like crazy under that. I've never worn a mask for that long.
I saw that on your social media. That was very funny.
I've never done that.
You're over there with your mask.
Yeah. So that was weird.
Hot.
I was on one side of the room from my crew. Then we had 2 tables in between. At the time, the shot I put on there, we were just doing some product shots. But we did have someone who was on camera, and there were 2 tables in between them. That's the new normal, at least for the foreseeable future. So that has been kind of trying to wrap my head around that and how we move forward and figuring out other creative ways. I've been ordering more masks and gloves so that I can have this available to the crews when they're out working. In terms of,
but you got notice you got back to work a little bit. You did your social distancing. You're being respectful. You're wearing your gloves. You got your mask on. That's what I'm saying. We've got to get back. People have to work again. They've got to get a paycheck.
Yeah, because at some point they're sitting.
Right? At
some point they're sitting around, and you're done with the editing jobs, and people, you need to bring in more content, right? So you can sit back and wait until it's 100% safe, and go out there, and then you're broke, and then you're out of business. So you have to figure out what is the safe zone that you can fit into, do all the things you're supposed to do, but still go out and make a living. Right.
Yeah.
So that's on that side. But sort of generally speaking, what I'd like to see the news media do, I want reporters, I want news organizations to focus less on the hits, runs, and errors. Every single day, newscasts start off with, or some of the things you see on social media. This many people died. This many people got infected. Okay, that doesn't mean anything to me unless I know exactly, what was the number yesterday? How does it compare to it? That kind of thing. So stop doing that. There is a place to have that if people want to go find it. Let's talk about where we go from here, right? As opposed to talking about everything that's going wrong. Let's talk about, okay, we're on the verge. Some are opening up again. We all at some point have to get back to our daily lives. What is that going to look like? And make that the focus of our coverage, right? Too much of focusing on the negative part doesn't really get us anywhere. And so I'd love to see more of that happen.
To that point,
Claudia,
I just read a really interesting article about New Zealand and Jacinda Ardern there, the prime minister, and because they've effectively, flattened it. I think I can't say they've eliminated it, but they've made great strides. And I would like to, I found this article. It was kind of not an easy read. Somehow it came up on my social media, but I was thinking, why aren't we focusing more on Germany or on New Zealand, or people who have managed to either eradicate it or have gone forward, have reopened society. And so we can learn a little more from them. I mean, I feel like we have to dig to find those things, and that is reassuring. And, like you, Dan, since I left my staff writer position 5 years ago, I've been doing a combination of different things where I still film critic. I, do the NPR show, but I also do some cultural consulting, which is basically, I'm Latina. So what we do is, if a film or a project is maybe focused on something Mexican history, I'm there to sort of help with the cultural authenticity. So I was just, I've been working on a project with Amazon, and we were just in Mexico for that before all this happened in late February. So, that had to end. And then I also programmed some film festivals. So those are kind of in, the netherworld. We had to cancel one. The other one may or may not happen. So, I'm still working, doing a fair amount of consulting and, reviewing, and I do Zoom Q&A. So we've all adapted to the new normal and are going forward. And in some ways, it's kind of exciting. I never know, what new project might come up that it maybe involves something virtual, but it's, I am sort of, I don't know. I mean, we all toggle between, I feel grateful to have a roof over my head and to have family that's well and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's some concern, but I do feel that there's going to be some, innovation and some really interesting creative product and work that comes out of this. So I'm kind of excited about, where we're going to be.
How about you,
Right.
KJ? What are you working on?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for losing you guys with that connection. I'm back now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, no, yes, we can hear you. But remember, I had technical issues earlier on. You just got them now. John dropped off. But this is the beauty, right, of what's gone on since COVID. I mean, remember that video, and it wasn't even during COVID, there was a network reporter talking, and his kids ran in screaming. The wife's trying to get them and pull them in. This is just what happened. So welcome back, KJ.
That. I think that was BBC, actually.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we're all at home now. We're all at home using Wi-Fi at the same time. So
at the same time.
There are many
so
more people on
question, 8
hours a day at their home, so you're going to have technical glitches, right?
Well, I'm having sound issues, but my question to everyone, and now to you, KJ, was, what are you working on? What have you been doing? Can someone let me know, is that KJ or is that my end?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong there.
There's something wrong. Yeah.
With her end. All right.
You know what? If I could, Deborah, I think one of the things she was talking about there, which is really interesting, is that there are a lot of things that you can now do at home that you never thought of, right? That you could do from home. And I've had board meetings that I've now done from home. I'm on some boards. There are organizations where we do networking meetings once a month. We're now doing those online. And actually, I'm kind of thinking that maybe some of these are much more productive because I can now line up 5 virtual meetings back to back, get out of one, go in the next one, get out of one, go in the next one. You don't have to drive
somewhere. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Before, you could say, no, I can't do that because I'm going to be in this town, so I can't get there. So I've become, I think, much more productive now. And all of this has made me sort of look at how I manage life and work. And where before work was managing my life, now I think because of some things I've learned during this time, I think I'm going to try to let life run my work. And not to say that I'm going to do less. It's not like I'm going to do less work or anything like that. But I just think I can be more productive because when you say to someone now, no, I can't meet with you, but can we do something via, computer? They get it. It's like, yeah, we can do it. They have the app. They know
people are willing to do it more, I think. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
I agree with you 100%. And I feel like, the silver lining to this is the work-life balance. I feel like, I've sort of regained family time, spending time with my children and my husband, and walking the dog a whole lot more than I ever did. The dogs are the ones who are really benefiting from all this.
So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to this challenging hour in terms of technical difficulties for all of us, I think. And I want to thank all of you for being here for this session.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having
us. KJ, what about you? What have you been working on lately, especially now that Zooming is a natural way of doing our work?
Well, more Zoom, right? I have had to take more Zoom. I mean, I think that by the end of us, we will be experts on Zoom, and we will probably own stock in Zoom. I mean, honestly, that company is going through the roof. But honestly, I've been doing everything on Zoom. I've had a couple of sessions with clients on media coaching. I'm still contributing to BBC and the German network, DW English. And I'm still doing everything on Zoom. Even public speaking events that I was supposed to speak at in public are now being taken to Zoom if they're done here nationally, and the international ones have been canceled. So I'm still staying busy. It's just a virtual world.
I have been busier than ever. I was telling the other two a little earlier,
right.
Because it seems like more people, because they're Zooming or whatever it is that they're using, they need to have some skills on, oh my gosh, how do I look? What do I say? Should I speak a little quicker, shorter, whatever? I've actually have been busier than ever. And to your point, speaking engagements, there's a film festival that I was hosting in June, and she's like, you know what? We still got to go on. We're going to do it virtually. Look at this, the LA BookFest. We're doing it virtually.
Right.
And we have some technical difficulties today, but guess what?
That's life.
We roll with it. Right? You're going on and off. My audio was going out, and it's nothing we could do because, also this is a time where a lot of people are doing this.
Right.
So which means that, the
more people using the internet at home, right? When was the last time that people use the internet at the same time for 8 hours a day?
Yeah. Look, one of the local news anchors couldn't do her newscast the other night because she couldn't get out from her home. It's just happening. Right. But I've really found this talk interesting, right? I mean, it's been interesting on ethics in journalism. Pardon?
I said it was super beneficial, I think.
Yeah, because you've got, Claudia, who's got the entertainment angle. You've got Dan, who, of course, was an international correspondent and covered the White House. You have John, who's on the radio, who talks to just ordinary folks all day. You've got the two of us who've done print and TV for many years and now on live stream. It's interesting because we've been on the front lines covering this, and we still are, right?
Yes, we absolutely are.
What will it be like a year from now, you think? I really wonder.
Oh, so many things will be so different. There are so many things that will change, and we're not going to go back to the way we were living life. That's not going to happen.
Well, especially if we don't open some businesses anytime soon, they're just not going to be there for people. And that's what scares me. And I do hope that all of our good friends who are terrific journalists, those hard questions have got to be asked right now to a lot of our politicians. What's going to happen to them? Because we can't keep printing money.
No, we can't keep printing money. People want to go back to work. But people also want to be safe and want to make sure that if they do get this virus, that they are going to have the health care to get through it and see the doctors and have access to testing. So that's a true concern as well.
So many levels. I have to tell you, I wanted to get the antibody test. And it's, I know a lot of people claim to have it, but it's really not that readily available.
No, it's not that readily available. You're absolutely right. It's like they said, even with just the coronavirus testing a month ago, everybody that wants a test can get a test. That's what was said. And that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I've really enjoyed this panel. I mean, we've had a really distinguished group of people who are commenting on just how our fellow journalists are handling the coverage of COVID-19. We've never seen anything like it. So I really enjoyed co-hosting this with you, KJ, even though we're going in and out from time to time.
No. I mean, with all the technical glitches aside, I think we were really great. We had a diverse panel with diverse opinions, and I think we all did a pretty good job. And I hope that people learn something from us. Yeah,
it's just, you're out there doing the best you can, and a lot of tough questions to be asked, and we got to press our politicians. I guess that's how I feel.
And one thing I want to say before we end this really is just that, aside from all this news, to be honest with you, even though we're journalists, you know what I would recommend people? Take a break from the news. That's the best thing you can do, is take a breath, take a break, and get away from news and get outside. Keep your distance, be socially distant, but enjoy the sunshine. You got to get out and you got to get away from the news, because it will just stress you out to no end.
Yeah, I bike every day. And people are like, you do? I'm like, oh, come on. Yes, I do. I get on my bike and off I go, and I wear my mask, and I'm not near anyone. I'm not breathing in anybody's space. So to your point, get out where you can, even if it's in your yard, or if you open your window, whatever, Anyway, this has been a pleasure, hosting Ethics in Journalism.
Yeah.
COVID-19 for the LA BookFest. And I'm Deborah Zara Kobylt.
And I'm KJ Matthews. And thank you so much for tuning in.